Hello, college football fans, and welcome to episode 11 of College Football Throwdown. I am your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Good evening.
Yes, recording from two different sides of the country, West Coast and the Midwest. Make for a good tag team of college football experts, quote unquote. All right. So today, this is going to be our national podcast for the week 2 of college football. We're recording this literally right after the Nebraska-specific one that we did on the Nebraska-Alabama State game. So you're not going to be hearing another beer getting cracked this time. Sorry, guys. But why don't we start out with something we kind of talked about on our last podcast, which was how even in week 1, everybody was jumping up saying that how the SEC was playing such tougher teams and doing so well versus the Big Ten, who kind of struggled in week 1, and how Ohio State isn't deserving of number 1 because their schedule isn't so that good.
Right. Yeah, Alex, it's just frustrating me because of this overreaction, basically, that happens, and it happens every year and even every week within the season. There were a number of coaches, almost to the point where it seemed like they were singing out of the same hymnal, like somebody from the SEC office sent out a memo to say, "Hey, make sure we're beating the drum about Ohio State's schedule, so that if it ends up being a tight choice between Ohio State and some other team, we can make sure they don't get in, come selection time frame because of strength of schedule." The reality is that it was absurd that the national media folks who picked the poll, would go off and put 10 teams from one conference in that poll, and this week is a perfect example of why that's silly. You got a 6th-ranked Auburn team that has to go into overtime to win a game. You have a Arkansas who was probably, Brent Bulimia is the guy that was the real instigator of all of this conversation, and his team lays an egg against Toledo.
Yeah.
And so the bottom line is some of these teams that are ranked don't deserve to be ranked and probably won't be ranked, and so the rankings really are not very relevant until you get 5 or 8 or 9 weeks into the season. You have enough data that it begins to start to take shape. So I just wish people would kind of chill. And same thing with, on the other side of it, people like Notre Dame getting accolades because they look so great in week 1. Heck, even Ohio State looks so dominating and full of big play potential, against Virginia Tech. And then both of those teams, particularly Notre Dame, struggle a bit in the second week and start showing that they're not a finely oiled machine at this point, because no one is. There's not a team that's there yet. But there are certainly some teams that are going to be, there at the end, and I think that's where you just gotta, chill your wheels a little bit and let some things start to evolve and come together.
Yeah, I think maybe this season more than any past season, because of the Mike Riley situation in Nebraska, I've sort of come to understand that, a college football team is a constantly evolving kind of beast, as it were, and that the team, because they come back for fall practice and they get 3 or 4 weeks to play together, but that's really it. And they're expected to be playing hardcore college football, and then that gel that kind of makes teams come together isn't usually there right at the beginning, and you sort of kind of find your way as you go. You get injured, other people replace those guys, and so by the end of the season, you come out a very different team than you were in week 1. And that's just a general rule for everybody, pretty much.
That's correct. And usually a season success is defined by how much you're able to improve over the course of a season. And are you able to do that in kind of a linear fashion where you're making improvements every week, as opposed to having games where you fall back into old patterns or whatever. And so, that's what defines the season, and that's what makes college football so awesome, is every week is a new experience. It's a new adventure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we already talked about a couple of the big games. Like you said, probably the biggest upset of the week was Toledo beating Arkansas 16-12. Given that they were ranked 18th in the country, certainly wouldn't have expected that to happen. And then Auburn having to go into overtime to beat Jacksonville State 27-20. Not the best showing for the SEC, like you said.
Right, but of course there'll be conversation about the Big Ten again this week because again there was some disappointing performances there too, such as the Maryland loss. Even though they were playing Bowling Green, another MAC school, but Bowling Green has a quarterback that is very very talented, and I threw for I don't know something like 500 yards. Bottom line is, in this day and age, you were just talking about it with the limits on scholarships, limits on number of practice hours that the players can have, and all of those types of things have put every program into a situation where, with rare exception like Ohio State or Alabama, every team has spots where they're thin, and if they have the wrong injury, could really affect their season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And another one of the big games, of course, was and this was we talked about this a little on the Nebraska specific podcast, but for those who didn't listen to that, BYU, the team that beat Nebraska in the dramatic fashion in the first game of the season, came out and pulled out another upset against Boise State, getting their last touchdown in a way that was eerily similar to our game with a jump ball in the end zone for a touchdown.
Yes, it is good to see BYU do that. Again, they can't keep living on the edge. They'll get burnt a number of times if they keep playing that way. They're still a very flawed and incomplete football team, but they're not without talent. And of course, the big game of the weekend was the Michigan State game.
Yes.
Against Oregon, and that was a game that lived up to its hype, its billing, really. And it was quite the interesting affair where both teams, presented challenges to the other team. There was never really a point in time where I felt either team was on the verge of blowing the other one out. It just seemed like it was pins and needles the whole way.
Yeah, well, talking about that, we had made some predictions last time about the score of that game. I had said that MSU was going to win 35-28, which turned out to be relatively close to the final score. And then you said that Michigan State was going to win 42-24. You were of the opinion that they really had the potential to blow out Oregon in that game.
Right. Well, and also, I've got to admit that I thought Michigan State's defense would probably slow Oregon down a little more, given that Oregon, had some pretty significant offensive losses off of last year's team for Oregon. But the fact is, Oregon played pretty well and showed that it's got some players that are going to do pretty darn good this season, including their new quarterback. He's the real deal.
Yeah, and the commentators kept on talking about how he'd only been on campus for 2 or 3 weeks, because of his transfer and all that. So, they weren't able to run the super fast-paced offense that Oregon is known for, because you have to kind of build up your time in that system to really get that down to a science.
Right, and that will probably come to bite them maybe at other points in the season too. It'll be interesting to see how Oregon season totally proceeds here.
Yeah.
Because I could see it going a couple of different ways for them.
Well, yeah, I was at the beach for quite a bit of Saturday, but I was checking the scores of a lot of the games on my phone. I got to watch some of the MSU-Oregon game, on my laptop. I saw the goal line stand that MSU's defense made against Oregon where they stopped them on 4th and half a yard. I love that. And I think it's interesting in that I think MSU definitely showed themselves to be the better team that day when you consider the fact that one of their Oregon's touchdowns was off of a punt return right at the start of the second half. Before then they had kind of struggled to get points up on the board.
That is true. I think that was and again a little bit of a surprise to me. I really kind of expected Michigan State to have the upper hand on from a special team standpoint, but it seems like Oregon did all right in that particular regard. And but at the same time, Michigan State's defensive line was the one that was getting sacks. I think they ended up with 4 sacks in the game. So it was a good overall effort by Michigan State. Showed they have some depth at running back. They're going to be a very formidable team as we go through. And frankly, it was one of the key interconference matchups going into the season between two, potentially championship teams. Teams that will play for the championship. And so I think that's a huge feather in Michigan State's cap.
Yeah, and a good thing for the Big Ten overall as well. I do kind of feel sorry for the Oregon fans a little because the team did a good job of pulling, starting to kind of look like it was going to be an upset. They were going to come back there at the end, and it sucks that the quarterback wasn't able to put the ball on that receiver. There near the end, they had one of the receivers was wide open in the end zone, and he just mistimed the ball. But if he had gotten that, Oregon very well might wins that football game.
Yeah, that is true, but that's the deal.
Yeah.
We've already experienced that as well. So.
Oh yeah, we have.
It's going to be interesting. Now I'm going to shift gears to another conference discussion, which is the Big 12 versus the SEC and the Oklahoma-Tennessee game. That game was hugely important to the Big 12 conference because really the Big 12, since they play 9 conference games, they only play 3 non-conference games. That limits the number of these interconference matchups, especially big-time interconference matchups that are going to happen. And so Oklahoma looked like they were going to get their doors blown off, falling down 17-0. Getting behind Tennessee, and it looked like maybe Tennessee might run away and hide, and then they just worked their way back, fought, and found themselves in the second half able to dig out of it and ultimately win the game in overtime. So,
yeah, no, I was keeping an eye on that score as well. That was a good pull away for the Big 12. But like you say, a little maybe shakes up their confidence a little bit, and that the team that. Well, Oklahoma's not the best team in the Big 12 because they got like Baylor and TCU, but one of their best teams, struggled against Tennessee.
Right, and had Oklahoma lost that game, and particularly if it had continued to go the way it was going early, then there would have been quite a bit of discussion, and it would have hurt TCU and Baylor's chances of building, an argument, if you will, right? And so that's why that was a hugely important win for the Big 12. It strengthens their ability to make an argument at the end of the season, for a team to get into the 4-team playoff.
Yeah. And also, we had talked on the last podcast, you had mentioned that you thought that the Iowa State matchup was big for the Big Ten in that similar regard, and Iowa ended up winning that game 31-17, so a plus for the Big Ten there.
Yes, that's true, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with Iowa State. Iowa State actually showed some things in that game that were pretty impressive. I thought they got some young talent, it looks like to me. But again, I look at them, and they were only able to produce like 60-some yards against Iowa, and that, I think, does not bode well for Iowa State winning a lot of football games throughout the course of the season. But again, they're going to be playing in the Big 12, which is very wide open and tends to have a little less run defense focus than the Big Ten, so that might not hurt them as bad as I think it's going to. But that'll be certainly something to keep an eye on, is how Iowa State does as it plays the remainder of its schedule in the Big 12.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to mention you had another prediction actually on the last podcast that Notre Dame might struggle against Virginia. You thought they were a legitimate contender, and that game ended up being pretty close, 34-27. Probably the biggest story coming out of that was that Notre Dame lost their star quarterback, which is going to hurt them in the season.
Yep, that is really going to hurt Notre Dame. And in fact, I would say that was a team that I was thinking was very legitimately headed towards a possible inclusion in the conference or this college football playoff. and I don't see that now. I mean, I know this young quarterback who replaced him played pretty well and stuff, but I just think that ultimately that's going to come back to haunt them. But here's another interesting development to kind of keep your eye on in terms of trying to forecast the future. What happens now with the success of Michigan State? If Michigan State does what everybody expects they're going to do, which is, frankly, to go undefeated until they play Ohio State, the remainder of their games, you could potentially have a top five Michigan State team and a number one ranked Ohio State team playing each other fairly later in the season. And then let's say Michigan State loses that game like most expect, and Ohio State continues to win out. Michigan State would find themselves on the outside looking in on the conference championship game, but would be sitting there at 11-1 with their only loss to Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's a really strong and a win
Over
against
Oregon.
an Oregon team that is probably going to be one of the better teams, if not the best team still out there in the Pac-12. If that ends up playing out that way, how do you exclude them, right?
Right.
How do you exclude Michigan State?
Yeah.
Now you got Ohio State and Michigan State both in that playoff, and I guarantee you, there's no way that the SEC will allow two Big Ten teams in before there's two SEC teams in. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Just based on the whole strength of schedule thing. So what you could possibly see happening is now you got it's going to become very difficult to get all that in with the Big 12 team, which was excluded last year, and the Pac-12 team. If it's anybody other than Oregon, I mean, you could see the Pac-12 being left out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that I hadn't quite thought of it that way, but that does put into perspective just how important that Oregon victory is to Michigan State's national championship hopes. Obviously, this is all total speculation. All depends on how things play out, but it would be interesting if Michigan State is 11-1, like you say, they're only lost to Ohio State, and let's say Oregon wins the Pac-12. So all of a sudden they're being considered a contender because they're a conference champion, but Michigan State's the one who beat them, and then they're only the losses to the number one team. So how do you figure that out?
Right. And if you choose to exclude the Pac-12 champion, that really is hard to do. So, because most people would argue that the Pac-12 is either the best conference or the second best conference, so how can you exclude them? So it gets back to a thing where if you kept Michigan State in because of that one win and their body of work, then you'd be looking at keeping the Big 12 out a second time.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that we've talked in the past how we think it's important that conference championships matter, in that playoff. So on the one hand, I'd kind of want for Michigan State to get in there just as a member of the Big Ten, but at the same time, in terms of what that would mean for the playoff as a whole, because already we have 5 major conferences, so there'll be 5 teams who are the best of each, but there's only 4 spots available. So if you're giving 2 of those precious spots to a single conference, that's a big deal to those guys who are going to get excluded, and that's going to create some serious discussion if that ends up happening.
And Alex, I 100% agree with you. And my argument would be Michigan State in that scenario, Michigan State should not be in the playoff, even though you could build the straw man to justify it for exactly that reason. The bottom line would be Michigan State, if you wanted to be in the playoff, beat Ohio State. Mm-hmm. Period. No, end of conversation.
Yep. Well, that's what's kind of exciting about this. We're still in the beginning stages of this new playoff era, so precedent hasn't been set, for these sorts of things. So that's what's interesting.
Yes, and I would like the precedent to be set to say you don't get in if you don't win your conference. That you had your chance, you could have beaten Ohio State, and you'd be representing your conference, and you would have had a chance to win your conference and go to the championship, but you didn't. So move aside, and let's let the other ones go. Let's go.
Right.
And that way, because this is going to come up with the SEC, I would love for it to come up first in a Big Ten scenario and have them exclude the Big Ten's second team, so that then when it comes up with the SEC, there would already be a precedent because you know it's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, and like you and I have talked that for as much as, the Big 12's kind of system of not having conference championships seemed to work against them last year, at the same time, if you tweak the way that season played out just a little bit, both
Yep.
TCU and Baylor could have been legitimate contenders for, being in there. And that would have gotten the Big 12, two teams in there instead of zero, so just a little adjustment could have made that a possibility.
Right, absolutely true. So we've gone a little bit on the sidetrack there, but it's an interesting one, and I think it's one that we need to keep our eye on as the season progresses.
Yeah. Yep. The last big top 25 matchup I wanted to talk about briefly was LSU and Mississippi State played each other 21-19. LSU pulled that one out. I didn't really know anything about the game. I didn't watch it or anything, but it seems like it was a close game. We predicted that LSU was going to win that game as well.
Yes, exactly. And there was kind of a furious comeback rally, whatever. But that's a big win. That's a big win for LSU.
For sure. And then within the Big Ten, there was some interesting things going on. Minnesota beat Colorado State, but they had to go into overtime to do it, 23-20. Kind of interesting, given that they showed themselves pretty well in their Week 1 game.
Yes, I would agree.
Yep, we had that. This is kind of interesting for me. Wisconsin beat Miami of Ohio 58-0. Big blowout. Miami of Ohio is the rival school of the university I went to college at, Ohio University. We kind of have this back and forth rivalry thing going on with them in football. So I was kind of happy to see Wisconsin crush them. But it'll be interesting to see because Nebraska has to play Wisconsin, and they clearly proved with this that they didn't lose to Alabama because they were a bad team. It's just that Alabama is that good.
Yes, and it also showed they had great defensive statistics in that game, that Wisconsin's defense is for real. Let's talk a little bit about this coming week's games. We talked a little bit about the Miami-Nebraska game being one of the headliners just from a namesake standpoint, not necessarily a ranking standpoint. But this third week is going to be a week, frankly, it's a little soft on big-time matchups. Early in the week on Thursday night, the Thursday night game on ESPN is Clemson at Louisville, and that's a game that's a pretty attractive matchup just because of Louisville's recent history, and obviously Clemson is expected to be one of the best teams in the ACC this year, so that'll be an interesting one to see. And then on Friday, another ACC matchup, Florida State at Boston College, is on ESPN Friday evening, and that's another game that if I remember correctly, it was a couple of years ago, Boston College was one of the few teams that pulled some major upsets, like they beat USC and last year I think it was. So Boston College is one of those teams that sneaks up and beats somebody good almost every year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking through the games for next week right now. You're kind of right. There's not a lot of. Oh, here's one: Georgia Tech, Notre Dame. That's a top 25 matchup.
Absolutely. That's probably if I'm not mistaken, that's probably one of the biggest matchups, and that's at Notre Dame, right? So that'll be on NBC.
Yep, it's at Notre Dame. There's also Auburn plays LSU. That's a big SEC matchup.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I guess I didn't even realize that one was happening. That's huge.
At LSU as well.
It's at LSU, but it's during the day.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yep.
Well, that'll definitely be one we're going to have to keep an eye on, is that Auburn LSU one, because Auburn's coming off a underwhelming first couple of games, and LSU just had kind of a season motivating victory against Mississippi State, although they kind of let things get interesting late. That is going to be one to keep your eye on, Auburn LSU.
Yep. And there's Ole Miss at Alabama, another big game. And now, ironically, BYU has worked its way to number 19 on this list, playing number 10 UCLA. Now,
yes,
all of a sudden,
right.
that's a big game.
Yes, and Ole Miss Alabama is a big game too. So,
yep.
So actually, I was wrong. I thought it was a little softer overall, but that's pretty darn good roster of games.
And this is one I have a question mark on. Stanford at USC. That's a big Pac-12 matchup. But what is Stanford's kind of standing this year? I know they're not ranked in the top 25.
Interesting. They won, of course, this past weekend, and USC, of course, is widely regarded as probably the best team in their division of the Pac-12. And so, everybody will be on the USC bandwagon. But if Stanford's going to turn their season around from that disappointing loss to Northwestern, this would be the one to do it with. That's for sure. I don't think it's going to happen, but wow. So, yep, some really nice games in the evening. Not everybody's going to be watching Miami, Nebraska, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, like you say, there's a lot of history between those two teams, even though it hasn't been in recent history.
Right, that's true. It's true.
Yeah. Alrighty then. Well, I guess we made our prediction about the Nebraska game last time. Is there any of one of those big games we want to try to nail a score down?
The one I was going to talk about, of course, after you brought it up, is that Auburn LSU game. That seems like the one that we ought to take a stab at.
Okay, I'm game for that. Let's see here. I'm trying to find it on the sheet. Here it is.
I will. It's a 2:30 p.m. game. It's on CBS. I'm going to say a couple of things. Number one, I think LSU's victory this week is going to be a one that kind of launches them a little bit. I think that it's at LSU, so it's a home game. So I think LSU enjoys a pretty substantial home field advantage. And so I think there's a lot of things that make you want to lean to LSU. But the fact is Auburn is kind of up against the wall here a little bit. They clearly need to play better. And so their coaches are going to have to kind of rally the troops. But I just don't think you do that at Tiger Stadium at LSU. So I'm going to predict an LSU victory, and I'm going to say that LSU is going to win with some kind of swarming defense. I think Auburn's going to continue to struggle with their quarterback not being a perfect fit yet for that offense, and LSU having enough offense to get the job done. It'll be relatively low scoring, probably like maybe 28-17 or 31-21, something like that.
All right, we'll go with 31-21 then.
Okay.
All right,
let's do 31-21.
Sure, why not? I'll go ahead. I'm just based off of the fact that Auburn struggled to win against Jacksonville State, of all things, just makes me think that they, like you say, they won't be able to walk into Baton Rouge and upset a pretty good LSU team. So I think I'm going to agree with you. It's going to be a LSU victory. I'll go ahead and say for this one, let's say 28-14. That's what I'll say.
Okay. That sounds good. Hey, real quickly then, don't have to pick a score. BYU at UCLA. Any chance BYU pulls it off and wins a third one?
Like I said on the Nebraska podcast, I would love it for BYU to do that because that only helps Nebraska now that we've lost to them. But I just got to believe it's at UCLA, and now that BYU has upset two teams in a row, I got to believe that the UCLA guys are giving this all of their focus. And so I got to believe, I think it might be a good game, like a reasonable score, like BYU won't get blown out, but I think UCLA wins at the end of the day.
Okay, and here's my final thought. This is your homework for the week, Alex.
Okay.
If you would like to go to the UCLA game and watch that UCLA BYU game, I have somebody who can get you good seats. All you have to say you want to do it, and you could be there.
Huh. Well,
think about that.
That's a little tempting now.
Let old dad know I've got an old friend of your uncle's that could get you some tickets that he has out at the UCLA, and it is a beautiful stadium. That's the Rose Bowl, baby. That would be an experience. You should consider doing that. Just let me know.
All right, he's throwing this on me, listeners. I did not hear about this before the podcast. But all
That's
right,
fun. I just thought of it. I didn't realize. I just was thinking about it as I saw that at UCLA. So anyway,
but now
yes,
you need
let's make it
to.
happen.
I like that idea, but back to the original topic. You got to predict what's going to happen.
I think UCLA wins it. I think, and they may even make it pretty comfortable.
All right, that's prediction. So this is the wrap up for our week 3 preview and week 2 wrap up of college football throwdown. That's why we love this great sport of college football so much. You can never predict what's going to happen. Injuries and upsets happening every week. Big plays. That's what makes this chaotic sport so fun.
Absolutely. All righty. Well, let's enjoy another week of great college football and go Big Red.
That's right. You can email us at huskerpete13@gmail.com. Find us on Podomatic. We're footballthrowdown.podomatic.com. Find us on iTunes. Leave us comments, ratings, reviews, all that good stuff. And so until next time, go Big Red.